and welcome to our Lead Different podcast. I'm excited today. So this is the premiere of Dr. Holly White's episode. I interviewed Dr. Holly White all the way back in December when we were launching the podcast, and between getting busy with doing a lot of things, I hadn't had the chance to get a hold of Dr. Holly White and scheduling the premiere. But I got to tell you, she is the one of my favorite guests that I've had, and I think you guys are going to enjoy listening to the interview. She's a fellow challenger and learned a lot from her. She wrote an article. So the reason we connect is she wrote an article on the creativity of ADHD, more insights on a positive side of a disorder. And you guys are going to hear her thoughts on that article and just how we view ADHD as a disorder. But one of the things we're going to talk about, and Dr. Holly White, thank you for being here. First of all, let me start there.
Thank you. I'm very much looking forward to this.
We had the chance to chat, and but one of the things that I know those of you that are watching the premiere that you're going to love is the fact that Dr. Holly White, as I said, is a fellow challenger. Her YOS is make sense, challenge, contribute. So you can imagine, because I'm contribute, challenge, make sense. She and I hit it off right away. We had some wonderful conversations leading up to the interview, and then I thought we had just a lively interview, and I can't wait to share that with you guys. But Dr. Holly White, what's been going on with you over the past 6 months? What's new?
Well, I've been working quite a bit on my book, which is the larger version, the blown up book size version of creativity and ADHD. And I I've been working a lot about that. And I think actually that ties in very nicely to my why not, because it's really my way, I think, of getting at the why, understanding, making sense of the connection between ADHD and creativity. And then what I hope is that this book is really going to spark people, whether researchers, clinicians, people, everybody out there, to go and do what they do even better. So I'm hoping it's going to seed or spark a lot of different ideas. And that's where I like to go back and step back and go back to the drawing board and then do my own thing while other people carry those ideas forward. And
Well, you know, it's such a gift to talk about ADHD as a gift, not as a disorder, and not as a negative. It's to look at the creativity that comes from it, and to have somebody at your level. I know you invited a couple of colleagues. I saw the emails going back and forth that you're working with. What are you working with? What are you guys working on with them together?
right now, I think this is part of an emerging discussion on um, really an awareness, a growing awareness of neurodiversity and its potential out there in the world. So really kind of stemming, I think, initially from trying to destigmatize ADHD, but now you have all of these people talking about this phenomenon whereby we're finding some of these same things that can create difficulties in some contexts, like inattention, are
Right.
very potentially beneficial in other contexts, like innovative thinking. And so at the same time, people have been talking about how individuals with differences in their thinking, whether it be autistic spectrum traits or attention deficits or dyslexia, have very unique sorts of ways of looking at things that could potentially be very valuable to the workplace. So I think that companies too are realizing not only can we be more inclusive, but actually we could potentially capitalize on these strengths and create a more synergistic model where we have people bringing in strengths that would otherwise be appreciated. And how do we facilitate all that? So some of the people I'm hoping to bring into the loop too are going to be the ones, the big players that will communicate some of these findings to the large industries who think, okay, we've heard about this, we don't know quite how to go about it, but there's got to be something we can do here to bring in these people and make their strengths shine, identify them, all of those different things. And where I come from with this is I think this isn't just a question of neurodiversity in terms of things that have traditionally been viewed as deficits, but actually it's individual differences, and we all have our different styles and approaches. So one thing I
Right.
like so much about think different is you get to capture this variance in people. So you in neurodiversity, you might be talking about some extreme variation from the norm, but we're all different. And the idea of creating a synergistic workplace where strengths and weaknesses balance each other out, and you get these pieces that just slot together and create something that's more than the sum of its parts these are not new concepts, but there's a new appreciation for them. And with the whole digital revolution, people being able to come together like this, and
Right.
you and I are a perfect example of that, coming together, and then able to loop some people in who found me through the Scientific American article and we're working on something else, and then word of mouth, which is of course many times over on the internet. You start
Right.
bringing together all these voices and realizing this is a doable thing. And there's so much that's happening together. This confluence of so many factors with neurodiversity and AI and implementation of all of these strengths. So I think we're in a place of extreme momentum when it comes to human ability and our minds, and recognizing and reframing, redefining what all that is.
Dr. Holly, if as a person who has been told, I have not ever been formally diagnosed with ADHD. If somebody who's been told his whole life, you've got ADHD, to hear you talk about all the positive aspects of it, and there's a lot more in the interview, and to see the steps that you're taking, in the work that we do at Why Not Leadership, we work with teams and we help them understand each other, right? And we
Yes,
want to know who
absolutely.
those challengers are who are those neurodivergent thinkers in the group,
Right,
and how can
right.
we take advantage of their strengths. And that's exactly the research and the work that you're doing. So I know we'll
Yes.
definitely have some conversations post the podcast, and I'm so glad we reconnected. So do you have any I want to ask you a little bit more about outside the box consulting. How is that going? How's that venture going for you?
Well, I haven't been doing quite as much consulting now because I'm doing a lot of writing. I'm really kind of pouring my heart into this book, and I'm starting to find a new calling with this. I absolutely love it, and I'm actually working on several books simultaneously. So I my main impetus now is the main book that I talked about, the ABCs of creativity and ADHD. That is the main focus. But I have been doing a lot of writing, and I kind of see this as a reinvention of what I want to do next, both nonfiction and some semi-fiction that is based on some of these concepts and using them playfully and a way to make them accessible.
Well, let's make sure that when those books come out, you let us know. We want to make sure we let our audience know about it so that we can all go out and buy it. It sounds like a great collaboration. I love that you're getting more into your writing. And it's okay that we slow down on the consulting to get this project off the ground. I think these books are going to
Oh
be
yeah,
they're going to add so much to the discussion that is so necessary out there. So, without any
yeah.
further ado, and Dr. Holly White, do you have any other parting words before we launch the podcast and let people listen to us?
No, just that you're going to get very busy, Dan, because anyone that comes to me and asks, how do we implement neurodiversity in the workplace, thinking you were doing that before it was a thing. That's what you're doing. You're looking at individuals, their strengths, teams, thinking differently, leading differently. So I hope that you're ready for some exciting
W
things to come.
We at Why Not Leadership are very ready, Dr. Holly. Thank you so much for being
Bring it
being a
on.
voice for us. Yes, bring it on. And of course, outside the box consulting and Lead Different would want to work together, right? It's just a match made in heaven, as they say. So, hey, without any further
Absolutely.
ado, let's move on to the episode. Those of you
All
that
right.
are listening, if you have any questions, put them. If you're listening on YouTube, on Facebook, or on LinkedIn, put your comments as the interview goes on, and we're gonna be here in the background, and we're gonna be answering your questions. So thank you for joining us, and let's get to that interview.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Holly White. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Why Not Leadership. I'm excited today to bring to you Dr. Holly White. She is a cognitive psychologist and the founder of Outside the Box Consulting. She specializes in attention deficit, ADHD, creative cognition, neurodiversity, and educational design. Dr. White has written and spoken widely on creativity in adults with ADHD and is the author of several empirical studies on the topic. She's also maintains an active research collaboration with her colleagues at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. She's an independent research scientist, a consultant, and an author. So, Dr. Holly White, welcome to Why Not Leadership. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you. Thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you for being on. We're excited to talk to you because, we connected via me seeing an article of yours where
Mhm.
you talked about I was on a leadership podcast talking about the gift of ADHD. And that led me to an article that you wrote on the positivity of ADHD. So I've got to give credit to David Martin, who said, I don't call myself ADHD. He says, I call myself a creative divergent mind. Now,
Yes.
when I Googled that, Dr. White, your name came up because you wrote an article on this. So um, what sparked your interest in studying this very specific area of human psychology, ADHD?
Well, it started with an interest in, and then, in fact, of course, ADHD is a very large component of a study within cognitive psychology, which is my specialty, the study of thinking, memory, that sort of thing. And so in graduate school, I was a little bit more focused on classic memory-based research, attention, and my interest in attention deficit disorders was very much with the classic deficit model.
Yeah.
So looking at how memory would go wrong, or there would be problems with what we call executive functioning in ADHD. And so I did, and I found very, very interesting sorts of errors that people were making. People who were diagnosed with ADHD making these very creative errors. They were really fascinating. And so when I say errors, I mean giving responses that were not the correct answer or the expected answer, but were actually maybe even better in some ways. I guess I saw all of these sorts of creative outputs and I wondered what might be behind all of that. And when I looked into it, I only saw anecdotal reports. There were some different books and some studies that said, oh, kids with ADHD might be very active and explore-like, and maybe they're very creative. But people hadn't really looked at it scientifically, which was my area. And I wanted to take a stab at that. So
Mhm.
that's where I started it with my dissertation in 2005.
Yeah, and it's fascinating work. If you've not had a chance, we're going to talk about that specific article that I found and some of the research that you've done in that. But one of the things I like to start with, Dr. Holly, and is your why OS. So you
Yes.
like all our guests, I always like to give people the why discovery and understand their why operating system. So
Right.
no surprises here, right? Your why is to make sense of the complex and
Right.
challenge. Your
Right.
how is to challenge the status quo and think differently, and your what is to contribute. So when we did that review with you, I remember your reaction. But share with our audience, what was it like for you when we discovered your YOS and we went through your results?
Well, my results, as you said, did not surprise me. But quite frankly, as a psychologist, what did surprise me is that you nailed it with this. I mean, not to be overly skeptical, but many times when you are looking at instruments that are maybe just not as well known, or maybe don't have as, or not as extensive, and don't have a whole battery of measurements, it takes a while to really capture these different elements, whether they be attitudinal or behavioral, cognitive. And it's almost like, I don't know, almost like you maybe had doctored it for this show, but you didn't, to say, hey, oh, of course she thinks outside the box. That's what she does. She's a researcher, so she wants to understand. But no, I mean, this was actually a really fun to do assessment, because also it gave me some context for some things I already kind of knew about myself. But I like the way that it's grounded in the idea of how I might apply this, use this, think about this, or how other people might perceive my thinking style, which is not actually something I'd given a lot of thought to.
So yeah, tell us about that. When we look back on your life, have you always been a problem solver, somebody that likes to make sense of things? You process things very quickly, and then what you do that by challenging the status quo, doing things differently, and then
Right.
ultimately you want to contribute to the success of others. Has that been a pattern for you?
I think so. Yes. And I think I had shared an anecdote where even as a little kid, I would do things differently with the materials that I was given. So I was maybe 4 or 5 years old and given one of the toy Fisher Price stoves, and all the other little girls are making, their pretend cakes and baking. And I put mine in the basement and I filled it up with these little baby food jars. And then when my mom was cooking, I would say, Mom, I'm doing an experiment. I need some ingredients. So she'd give me whatever she's working on, usually like flour, sugar, or something. And I'd add water and I'd add like different things I found in the basement. And I'd put it in the jar, put it in, and my lab contained all these different molds and things. So credit to my mom for allowing me to engage in that bizarre thing where God knows what I was growing in the basement. But I just wanted to experiment. I wanted to play with things. And I suppose even from day one, I was using things for maybe things other than what they were supposed to be doing. I also have my undergraduate degree in biology, and I have always had an interest in living things and systems. So while other little girls were trying on dresses, I was digging for anything I could find in the dirt and doing my little experiments, trying to understand stuff. And then maybe also get other people to understand it. And now as an adult, I can appreciate that sometimes if your interests are contrary to what the current interests are, it's not going to be widely accepted, then you might have a little work to do to get people to sort of understand where you're coming from and maybe understand that it could potentially have an impact.
So you're touching on so many things that are so important, and you mentioned it. You're so thankful to your mother for allowing you to be the creative person that you were,
Right.
and allowing you to express that. Because what we find when your how is to challenge the status quo, you're going to do that. By the way, I share your how, so hang on to your seats, everybody. We don't know where this interview is going to go, and I love that you have that behind you. Break the rules. That is such a challenge thing to say. Break the rules. Do it outside the box. Do it differently. Your consulting company is outside the box consulting, and this was before you discovered your why, right? You didn't have this language beforehand. So you talked about breaking the rules. You talked about being outside the box. That article that led me to you was The Creativity of ADHD, More Insights on a Positive Side of a Disorder. I really want you to talk about this for those of you in the audience that have the why, the how, or the what of challenge. This is about the positivity of that creative divergent mind. And so tell us about the creativity of ADHD and the insights. Some of the things that you wrote about in that article really resonated with me, but if you could kind of walk us through the main points, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, I would say a big part of the creativity of ADHD or ADD, whichever you want to go with there, is you have some differences in the way that information is processed that allows you to approach different situations in a way that is kind of a unique perspective, a big picture. Sometimes, as you had pointed out, this idea of creative divergence, where you will maybe start with a central point and then branch out that idea and build upon it and expand the concept. So conceptual expansion, this idea of going outside what is the normal thing to do. So at a cognitive level, we're thinking about just the thinking component. Attention can be very widely distributed, and so you do tend to see the big picture and how everything fits together. But also there's this tendency to not remain focused on any one thing for a long time, and therefore you get all these interactions between ideas and between maybe a line of thought that's in the back of your head and something else that's out there that you're encountering, and there's not a lot of filtering. Another component to or I guess we could just say the behavioral part of all this creative behavior and attitude is that sometimes too you have the flip side of impulsivity, which is not quite a recklessness, but a tendency toward that take a risk behavior and to do things in a way that is unconventional and very often tends to be, I think, just maybe a less appreciation for following rules for the sake of following rules. You know what I mean? Like the fact that it is a rule doesn't seem to matter much for many people with this mentality. And we're not talking, of course, about laws or hurting people. It's not that sort of rules at all. It's more conventions, status quo, the way things are always done. I know for me personally, that part of it means nothing. I mean,
Just because it's been done that way doesn't mean you have to continue doing it that way, right?
right. It means nothing to me. That if anything, it means, well, let's see what's going on. I know people will say, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But there's not being broken, and then there's also being more effective. You don't, unless you're aiming to be adequate, maybe more is more. So you want to go past what's already been done. And the other part is, if you open up your thinking that way and you challenge what's already out there, I think that's how you become more unlimited in your thinking.
Mhm.
You're not limiting yourself to what's already there. If you can't really think about what might be beyond that, it's not going to occur to you that it could be anything other than what it currently is. So I think it is this tendency to sort of push against the current structure to see where else you can go and what else you can do.
So what's the gift? What do you see as the gift? In the article you talked about the difference between neurodivergent, ADHD diagnosed individuals that you had doing different assignments,
Right.
and then what the
Oh, I see what
average
you're
or
saying.
the regular the control group, I guess we should call them.
Right. The gift in terms of what you see for the product tends to be a very high degree of originality, which is a key component in anything creative, in that it has to be new and fresh and different. And that arises from a combination of factors so I guess I would think of the gift of ADHD is this tendency to think differently, to approach problems differently, almost by default, just by the way that you're wired. And if you are finding a fit with that in what you do, it can be a huge advantage. And so when you think about invention, many times without even thinking about something, if we're trying to solve a problem or create a product, what comes to mind is what already exists. And that tends to constrain our thinking. Like, well, okay, I want to maybe design this stapler, so it's got to look like another stapler. It has to have all these different affordances. And we put that into the problem space when it's not even real. I mean, who says a stapler has to be, flat and rectangular and that kind of thing? I've seen a very cool one that looked like a stiletto heel, and it was a stapler. As long as it has the affordances of the object, it doesn't have to resemble in physical form or function other versions of that object. And so if you are distractible and you are a person who's not really going to follow the rules cognitively, mind-wise, you're not going to tend to activate those paradigms and situations that are already out there. So you're not going to be constrained. And I guess that gift is a freedom of thought and expression. The same way that if you're in a situation where the goal is to be controlled and focused, then that's not considered a gift, right? So in a classroom or a lecture or something, you're supposed to just be still and listen. So you're being more receptive and passive, and information is coming in and you're supposed to just take it in. And the ADHD mentality tends to go in the other direction. And if anything, as they're taking it in, they're constantly thinking about it and bursting with questions. And so, you need this active, dynamic environment.
Love it. So, one of the things we talked about is the relabeling of ADHD. So David Martin talked about, I don't want to be ADHD. I don't want to be labeled ADHD because it has deficit and has disorder in it. You
Right.
talked about something in our previous conversation. We called it attention difference. Tell me why attention difference versus attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or attention deficit
I
disorder.
know. Well, there's probably a reason too that the name of this has gone through so many iterations over time within the different editions of DSM. Hasn't even always been ADD or ADHD. It's been called hyperkinesis. It's been, back in the day, minimal brain dysfunction. But it's had all these different names, and still, even the presentation and the description changes over time in the DSM, which tells me there's a reason for that. If you can't even quite define it adequately to put it in a manual of problems, well, it's hard to really characterize this. So you have different concepts in psychology, like things like extroversion and introversion, that are not considered disorders. And yet you might say, well, someone who is painfully shy is very disordered at parties. But that doesn't even make sense. I mean, obviously, some behaviors and some patterns are better suited to some activities than others. So where this idea of the attention deficit disorder kind of came from is that in the context of school, which is where it tends to be, diagnosed frequently by teachers, if you have a classroom experience that is demanding a certain type of attentional focus and you don't have that, then that is considered problematic for that context. Although I've never heard of a child going to, or it's probably very rare for a child or someone to say, well, I feel very attention disordered. I'm having a problem with this, Mom. What can we do? I mean, there might be times that they feel that as they get older in school, but generally it's the teacher who's saying, so-and-so won't sit still, so-and-so won't be quiet. And then as you get older, you might find, okay, I can't focus, I can't do this, but you're questioning yourself and your brain instead of questioning the fit and going, well, okay, yeah, this is hard for me, but I just have to get through this experience where I need to focus in order to get to what's beyond that, where I can maybe be an entrepreneur, or I can do something that's very active and dynamic. And so when it comes to the disorder component of anything, I always say that the key things that you need to be able to qualify something as a disorder are that it has to be maladaptive and that it has to be distressing. So distress with many things, and especially with this, is kind of optional. I mean, may or may not be distressing depending on any number of factors. As far as maladaptive, though, that is so context dependent that I don't think in many cases it's acting as a disorder. And if it is not, a person may have all of these different characteristics that we tend to think of as attention deficit disorder and not have a disorder. The fact that they are thinking in a way that is very divergent or expansive or easily distracted, that alone is not a disorder. It really isn't. If it's not impairing you, it's not a disorder. And as far as the deficit, the reason I would like to think of that as difference, or as some people would say divergent, attention is a really kind of a big concept, but you could think of it in terms of the fuel or the energy that you have mentally to focus on any subset of information. So it's kind of a question of what are you thinking about? So a person whose mind is wandering, they are thinking about the object of their imagination at that point, or perhaps maybe they're distracted by something. Then they're focusing on what they're distracted by. So attention is there. It's just where is it focused? What is it on? So if you said, pay attention to me, and then I didn't, and I drifted off, you might say I have attention deficit. But I only had attention deficit toward that conversation. My attention was somewhere else. I mean, if you really want to talk about that, it's not, a person who's under general anesthesia definitely has attention deficit during that time. That's what it looks like when you're not paying attention, that or sleeping.
Right.
Most people would agree that, especially if you have the H component, the high activity component, where you're tending not to be asleep. There's all kinds of attention. It's just, it may or may not be where other people want it to be at any given time.
So I mean, and when we talk about that specific challenge, Dr. Holly, we're talking about something that you've been able to overcome. You've been able to get a PhD and succeed through that academic environment. What were some of the things that you were able to do differently in order to get the work done, in order to achieve the academic achievements that you've achieved and finish the work? What was it? I know you talked a little bit about in the past about the hyper focus that you have to have. Yeah. It's not that you can't focus. It's you can't focus on stuff you're not interested in. Talk more about that.
Well, that's why I'd say I would, if I looked at my academic trajectory from kindergarten to PhD, I definitely got better as I went. The earlier, in kindergarten, I was always in trouble for hooking my chair to another chair and making a train. And in elementary school, I would do anything but what was done. Usually I would have to ask the person sitting next to me what the teacher just said, because her instructions were so long and boring that I tuned out. So then I'd ask the person next to me, like, just tell me what she said real quick and I'll tell you how to do it. So my friend would be like, oh, she says to blah, blah, blah. Oh, okay, here's how you do it. And that was our little thing. So that would work. Anyway, as I started to get into later courses in high school and then college and ultimately grad school, I got more and more focused on this selection or subset of information that I wanted to study. My only challenge, honestly, in grad school was there were a couple times that I thought, well, I want to do something different. I think I want to go into advertising. And No, my mom would say, Holly, 1 degree at a time. So, I said, I want to do this and I was pursuing a psychology, a biology undergrad degree. And so I finished that one. I was bio pre-med, and then I started getting interested in psych. So really, I started pursuing my passions, my interests. And if it's something I'm interested in, I can't get enough of it. And so it kind of, when I say this is a context dependent thing, it does not impair the focus of my attention, the focus of my interests. It impairs other things. So I suppose that there might have been times where, or especially following the rules, I think if you were to ask my grad instructors, they would probably say, yeah, it was a handful. Because at the end of the day, I would kind of think, yeah, thank you for the advice. I'm going to do it the way that makes sense to me. And they, so maybe there was that. But really, if you are passionate about something, and also if you're looking at things differently, and I think I was, that's where you really get to do the high impact stuff, the stuff that you've really, been able to find your calling in. And for me, I think that's allowed me to do something that, I think I said this was my my big doing things differently, was to leave academia and go out on my own and do my own thing and feel confident enough to go that, yeah, I'm going to do my own thing. I feel good about this. I don't necessarily need the stamp of approval of all these other ways to do it. And I'm even saying something as controversial as, maybe we can leave off the disorder part sometimes. What? Well, yeah, of course. And sometimes you have to turn the whole paradigm upside down and really shake it so that you can make some differences and impact.
Yeah. So tell us about that. So you founded Outside the Box Consulting, and that's going out on your own and doing your own thing. And then we saw earlier your mission is to help people your mission is to inspire minds who think differently. And then you're the founder of Outside the Box Consulting. Is there a convergence of those two?
The Outside the Box Consulting, which is something that probably isn't even this sort of a part of my focus, part of what I'm doing, but I think I spend quite a lot of time doing my research, educational design, a little bit of this and a little bit of that. But the idea with the Outside the Box Consulting would be that I would take on problems and help somebody solve them in a way that is very unusual. So as strange as that sounds, I had a lot of trouble thinking about how to brand that because I thought, how do you say, hey, let's look at your problems from a different angle and solve them together, or brainstorm about how to solve them together. So primarily I thought, well, let me think about this in terms of educational coaching and consulting for individuals who are thinking differently so that they can succeed in different endeavors. But I also love the idea of taking on projects. And I have some clients that I've done that for, where they have very unusual things that they would like to do. So I can't be too specific, but sometimes it's a question of having a very unique, rare piece of a sliver market that you're trying to find a home for, make connections between some people who are far apart, who are not on social media, who need to get together for something. Just some strange, hard to define problem that somebody's been sitting on it. And I love those kinds of things that haven't been solvable by traditional means. So I would say the bread and butter of the Outside the Box Consulting is a little bit more a kind of a traditional coaching consulting for college students or adults who have either challenges with focusing or would like to kind of utilize these creative gifts. But also I think it's something that I would love to just make more of a problem solving kind of consultant.
Mm-hmm. And I like your goal to inspire and guide students so that they can go forward and make their own contributions in the world while you go back to science, because that seems to be your love. But you want to help them go forward. So how do you do that?
Yes. And partly too, I thought when I first switched out of academia, and I thought I wanted to do this consulting, I came up with this business model and ideas and a really cool logo. And then I got so busy with the other things that I was doing that consulting for clients that took up more of the time and had more of ongoing needs. So I was able to do that while I also do my research and while I write my book and all these different things. And so I didn't have to do so much with, I didn't even have time actually to take on any other clients or do anything with that. But I found that, that would be a good way to sort of organize all the different things that I'm doing. And so I continue to mentor students through a couple different programs where I take on a small group of students that we'll work with individually and work with them to mentor their research projects and their publications. And I really love that. I love when their idea speaks to me and I can do my best to help them look at it from all different angles and to keep their momentum up and their energy and their motivation for that, and then let them go. And I get a lot of satisfaction from that, from sitting back in the shadow and just watching them go out there and do their thing. And it's like, that feels like, okay, I've made a difference, because it needs to just be a stimulation of something where they go out and they make the waves. And then I, as you said, I go back to my science is my love, my comfort zone.
So we said, we talked about this. Your passion is research, especially in the areas of creative cognition and divergent outside the box thinking, painting, animal rescue. So what are you excited about right now that you're working on? What's next?
My book. I think because it's still in progress, I haven't wanted to talk about it too much, because I should just go ahead and talk about it. That way it'll keep me on track, right? Otherwise it's a procrastination thing and when we'll be ready. But right now I'm working on really compiling a lot of my research and that of my colleagues and my own ideas and perspectives over the past couple of decades in this, to really launch, I would say, a book that's very accessible, that's not necessarily going to be, I started off with thinking, well, let me go to MIT Press and I talked to them about some of these ideas. And then I thought, well, for my first step, I want to actually go and do something that's a little bit more accessible through sort of kind of self-publishing. And so my book that I hope to have finished in a couple months is really going to be a very both creative and scientific adventure for me, where I put something out there that I'm hoping will be, when people ask me all of these different questions, I can send them there, that they don't have to have an extensive background or knowledge in psychology or anything else to really be excited about these ideas and to learn from them.
Love that. So your book is the ABCs. We know that it could go through a title change, right? The ABCs of creativity and ADHD, but we're looking at spring of 2024. So I'm going to hold you to that, Dr. Holly. I want to make sure that book gets out, because I have gotten so much value out of listening to the research you've done and the work you've done, and allowing people to view this as a positive thing, not necessarily a negative thing. We talked about it. It's like being left-handed. It's not necessarily a disorder. It's just different, right?
It is. And it desperately needs to be looked at that way. It is. A lot of people are looking at it positively. But one thing that's surprising to me, and just to give you one quick preview from the book, because it is ABCs. There's a chapter for every letter, and P is for playful. And it's funny because if you look at the empirical literature for, especially with children with ADHD, studies have found that some children are impaired in playing. It's like, how is that? What? Wait, there's a wrong way to play? I mean, wow, we definitely need to revisit the concept. And what's funny is, of course, when I'm talking about playful, it's a slightly different angle that I'm going to be pursuing with it, but it's a little bit more of an exploratory mindset, a playful sort of, where you will sometimes do things partially and maybe a little bit uninhibited and experimental. You don't have to have it perfect before you try. Almost this kind of almost fun-loving aspect of life and experimenting with different things that adds to creativity. So essentially, every letter in the alphabet in the book is a different component of one of the things that will add, to this gestalt, or this big picture that is essentially the creative gift with ADHD. And I just think it's funny that one of the things I thought will be a no-brainer, the idea of this playfulness. And then when you look at what is done, that's something very difficult, though, to actually study. So whereas many of these concepts are scientifically backed, that's one of those things where it's like, if you actually look at it literally, the people who study play might be like, well, Tommy grabbed a toy from Jimmy over there. Well, that's not very nice. You score low in play. I don't know. Anyway, it's kind of interesting.
So let's finish up with our signature question, Dr. Holly, and thank you for sharing that, because I can't wait to see the book. I can't wait to hear the research. I know there are parents out there that if you're a parent and you have a child who's been diagnosed with ADHD, what advice would you have for them?
To really learn what positive strengths that your child has, because and honestly, parents so often know. So you know what I'll say? Trust your instincts, because so many times parents will say, I feel like that my child is creative and they do things differently, but the teachers are saying this and other parents are saying this, and sometimes they drive me nuts. And I'd say, you know your child, and help your child to get to know themselves, because there are strengths. There are strengths, and you have to look at this differently to appreciate its differences. And then read my book.
And I love, when we ask the question on your vision, it's 2020 with corrective lenses. That is such a different kind of answer that we get for that. Thank you for doing that.
I have to be careful on that questionnaire, because my sassy came out on quite a few. I'm like, Facebook, I told you I don't conform. I'm one of the last holdouts on that, because if I do it, my friends are going to say, so you joined the pack after all. And plus, I'd have to give up my perks. People send me stuff personally. They'll say, well, we had to invite you personally because we know you're not on, you don't do Facebook. And I'm like, nope, I don't. And I never will. And they're like, everyone does.
Eventually, they're saying eventually you will, and you're going to hold on to that, right?
Right. And then I think, now, why would I want to give up all my personal contacts? Because now I could just pretend, I just don't know. I'm deprived. I don't have Facebook. Everybody has to come and tell me. And so
I love that. That's a great perk. That's a great way to personalize things. It's a great way to think about it. I do the same thing. I'm rarely ever on Facebook. So I miss stuff, and people are like, hey, you missed it. I'm like, well, call me, text me. You got to let me know. I have no idea.
Tell me because you want to tell me, and I'm your intended audience, not because it's a shortcut. And I know it does definitely have I've heard many, many positive things too, but it's just funny. It's just one of those things where at one time I made that decision, and now the stubborn in me is sticking with it.
You're gonna hold out. All right. One last question. What is your biggest why not moment, Dr. Holly White? Time in your life when you said why not to something, and you're so glad you did, because it's turned out so well. And if you had said no to it, you'd have a completely different outcome. Can you tell us about your biggest why not moment?
Yeah. And let me preface it by saying that it tends to be how I approach everything. And so it has to be like, or why not more than other why not? So I would say it was taking the chance to go my own way. From academics, I think we're kind of trained to stay in academia. As my brother would say, you get your PhD so you can make more PhDs and send them out in the world to go make more PhDs. And, you do your thing, and you do it within a structure, and you follow the paradigm and the norm. And it's a safety net in many ways, and you don't want to lose your community. But I thought, well, let me just take a chance and do my thing. Mm-hmm. So I would say that making that choice was my big why not moment.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being with us. I have enjoyed getting to know you, Holly, the conversations we had, and getting the interview scheduled, and just hearing you today. I can really feel the passion for wanting to help those people that are being labeled as that having a deficit or a disorder, when they're really just creative divergent or attention different. Right. I love the different terms that you gave us.
Right. It's like you just do attention differently. Doesn't have to be a problem.
That is so great. Well, what do you say we end the show on that note?
Why not?
Thank you so much, Dr. Holly White. We will be talking to you soon. And thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you so much.